Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and a very warm welcome to you all to this forum here at the OECD this afternoon, where we are going to be discussing closing the gender gap. This is a very general description, closing the gender gap. What we mean by this is that the G20 has committed to the task of closing the gap between male and female participation rates in labour force by 25%. The economies of the G20 nations are committing to close the labour participation gap by a figure of 25% by 2025. So this afternoon we're going to have a discussion about the difficulty this may be for some economies, the challenges that are ahead, the challenges for female inclusion in the economies, the challenges of education that leads to women being able to find jobs in these economies, and the challenges for policymakers as well as they seek ways to improve the level of inclusion of female labour force participation. For example, I am from Australia, Anne Fullwood is my name, and I'm going to be your moderator here this afternoon. And the gap between male and female labour force participation in Australia is 24%. So we are looking to bring it down to 18%, the gap, by 2025. In Germany, I think the gap is 16%. So Germany has to bring it down to maybe 12%. Others will be wider, others will be broader. The average for G20 nations is 56% female labour force participation and 86% male labour force participation. So it's a gap of 30%. So it's a big ambition, and there'll be lots of discussion about the ways we can improve female labour force participation throughout this session. Now, we have a wonderful group of panellists here this afternoon from a mix of economies as well. We have Chile, we have Latin America represented, we have Korea, we have Italy, we have the WTO, and we have Canada, which is a country on its own, Arantxa, yes? And we have Canada as well. Our panellists, I will introduce them and then I'll get them to tell you a little bit about themselves. We've just had lunch together, so we've got a very dynamic conversation we're going to have here this afternoon, everybody, and it's interactive. I want you to ask questions as well. We will invite you from the floor to ask us questions as the discussion goes on. And we'll try and goad you, and we'll try and challenge you to join us in finding solutions, opportunities, insights, whatever it takes. And the main theme that we all agreed on at lunch is that this is an economic issue. Female labour force participation is not a social or a human rights issue, it is an economic issue. And we've just been, a couple of us, at the W20 in Xi'an in China, where we have reaffirmed that we do want to see governments of the G20 take leadership and improve female labour force participation rates by 2025 and close that gender gap. First of all, on my left here, we have Esperanza Cueto, the President, Comunidad Mujer Chile. Esperanza, please tell us a little bit, about 30 seconds. We're going to introduce each other, everybody. We want you all to participate. This is going to be a fun, dynamic, great panel here this afternoon. Esperanza.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm from Santiago de Chile, and I am the president of an NGO that works to promote women's participation in the public space and in the social space in general. We are facing quite significant challenges in our region because we are well below the OECD average in this sense, and we have challenges in quite a lot of different aspects. Our country has transitioned quite well recently. There's been a lot of economic development, but inequality is still a main challenge in Chile. And I would like to point out that the biggest manifestation of inequalities in our country is in gender disparities. We really need to start to face these problems because it's not only about human rights, about justice, but here, since we are at OECD, we're talking about economic development, of course, and of productivity, we have to take into account that this is also an economic issue, and we need to ensure a greater participation of women in labor, and in particular, or in the labor market, and particularly because of the economic aspect.
Good afternoon. My name is Yoon Sun Cho. I was the former Minister of Gender Equality and Family in Korea in the first cabinet under the first female president directly elected by the people in Northeast Asia. And then afterwards, I worked as a senior secretary for the political affairs at the Blue House to the president, and I'm now in my vacation. Actually, I visited and attended the same format of seminar, the session in year 2013 when I was working as a Minister for Gender Equality and Family. And I think that the reason why OECD invited me again is to check my record whether I implemented all the promises that I gave at the conference, and to see that Korea is doing well or not. Let me share at a later stage.
Yes, we will. We have wonderful insights from Korea, a model that may well work to improve female labour force participation. We'll move on to you after that, Yusun. Thank you very much. Linda from Italy, Linda Lanzillotta, Vice President of the Italian Senate and the Ambassador for Women in Parliaments. A little more about you, Linda.
Thank you. Good evening and good afternoon to everybody. As you mentioned before, I am now Vice President of the Italian Senate. I am a long career both in public administration and in politics. During my professional life, I never had responsibility specifically in the gender agenda, but all the roles I played, which were always very traditionally roles for men, I tried always to use the women point of view in my action, because I think that women should be so, not only to achieve high positions, but when you achieve them, then you have to remember to be a woman and to bring out the women agenda, which, as we told and we shall discuss, is not an agenda for women's rights, but for the general development and the future of next generations.
The economic advantage. It's
Yes.
the economic advantage.
And the economic advantage.
Of course.
But also for fighting against the declining population in Europe, for all aspects of our future, we need more women in jobs, more women in responsibility, and so.
Indeed. Linda, thank you so much. Our next guest here this afternoon is Arantxa Gonzalez, who's the Executive Director of the International Trade Centre. Sorry, I called you the World Trade Centre before. No, International Trade Centre. Thank you, Arantxa.
No worries. Buenas tardes. My name is Arantxa Gonzalez.
Good afternoon. My name is Arantxa Gonzalez, and I represent members of the United Nations.
So if you find in what I say anything you disagree with, please tell me. The International Trade Centre is a development agency that works to empower developing countries to reduce poverty, to grow, to create jobs, to develop through trade. And we are very passionate about women's economic empowerment. Why? Let me just give you one headline about why we think she trades is important. For every dollar that we put in the hand of a woman, it's $7 in education, in healthcare, in poverty alleviation. So if you're not convinced, continue with the conversation.
Arantxa, we look forward to more from you in a moment. Next is our founder and CEO of the G20, the Girls 20. We've spent some time in China last week. Farah Mohammed, over to you, Farah.
So I suppose I should start by saying I come from Canada, and you guys might be familiar with a man called Prime Minister Trudeau. So we have drunk the Kool-Aid in Canada. I would say three things. One, I'm pleased that this is on the agenda because this is a very bold and ambitious target that the G20 have set. Today, from my perspective, I think it's very important to understand the wraparound effects of a commitment like that. From my perspective, I've got a background in politics. I've got a background now working with the private sector and social profits. And I fundamentally believe that if we don't actually get our heads around this issue and start to measure the progress on this commitment, the underlying effects as they relate to poverty, as they relate to a whole host of issues, we will just not resolve them. So, you know, it's not a nice to have anymore. Girls 20 started off as a bit of a stalking initiative. We stalked the G20. We stole their idea. We called ourselves the Girls 20. And after 4 years of hard work with a lot of other organizations, we finally got this commitment. And I think this panel, it's a fantastic panel that I think will give some great ideas around how we keep their feet to the fire. So thank you.
The other thing too is that we didn't want this to be a talk fest. We spent a lot of time talking about targets and talking about creating ambitious targets and looking for results. But back to you, Farah, just for 1 second. The talking has to stop. We need to measure it. Am I right? We were talking about this at lunch.
You can't. If you can't see it, you can't measure it. You probably can't understand it, and you'll never value it.
Exactly. Thank you. So we're on to about ways we can measure it. We'll talk about this further. And finally, we've got Janet Awad, who's the region chair of Latin American country president of Sodexo Chile, representing the private sector. We've got a lot of NGO and government sector. Janet is our private enterprise girl, and I cheer you on because I am as well. Janet, over to you. Just a bit of a description of you.
Okay, thank you. I'm very happy to be here. I do believe this is a very important and key issue to afford. And I would like to say that I'm 20 years in Sodexo. I'm very involved in all the matters around diversity and inclusion with focus on gender balance as of 2009. And then I'm going to tell you about some of our achievements and initiatives we put in place. What other things important? I'm 27 married. 2 children, 25 and 23 years old. And just one thing, I would like to take advantage of the possibility to express myself in my language. So I'm gonna speak in Spanish later on. Okay.
No problem.
Thank you for your comprehension.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let's get started. We wanted to set the scene here a bit about how hard it might be culturally to impose such a target and such an ambition. So I want to go to you, Yusun, first, because of you having a female president since 2013. You've also been involved, and you're here to be measured, you say anyway. But the background in Korea to such ambition and setting targets for gender equity in your government. Tell us a bit about what you've been doing in Korea.
Actually, I was the spokesperson for my president when she was a candidate in the year 2012. And one day, we were talking with a girl student from the college, talking about the status of women and empowerment of women. And then suddenly it occurred to me that if we have a female president in Korean society, then men will voluntarily think how to communicate well and get along well with women. So that will bring a fundamental change in the Korean society. As a first female Korean lawyer at my law firm, I really had a very, very hard time to do the everyday life, finding buddies to have lunch together or chat over coffee. And it was very hard for me. And then adjust myself in a male-dominant society was very hard. I had to make myself more active and more tough. And then I think the other female kind of employees experience the same thing. What amused me when we have a female president was 2 things I'd like to share with you. The first one is being at the first cabinet and in attending the cabinet meeting, it's so kind of interesting to see that all the ministers, the men ministers in 17 ministry, were so eager to get the compliments from the female president. Yeah. And once they get some kind of compliments from her, they repeatedly relay it to their friends and colleagues several times. They look so happy, and that amused me most. And the second thing was that
We might talk to you about this in a minute, Linda, being in politics.
And then the second thing was that I heard from the former ministers from the previous government, so that their advice was, Yun-sun, don't get frustrated, because when I was sitting in the cabinet meeting, whenever the Minister of Gender Equality tried to say something, the other ministers just shared very silent kind of agreement, gender again. But that never happened in our cabinet. Having female president sitting, raising issues, and asking for what happened to the work-life balance and the employment of female employment. So I think that kind of brought a great change at the very high level of Korean government. And in the conclusion, I think that having a female president made it successful to have a gender mainstreaming at the level of government by linking gender issue to the female employment issue and the ultra low birth rate, fertility rate issue. And then we form a gender policy coordinating committee, and the Minister of Gender Equality act like a coordinator to get rid of all the silos in the government. So in 3 years, we have raised the female employment rate up to 55.7% by 2.2%. And then our target for the member of female at the government committee was 40, and then now it is 35. We raised it from the 25%, and we expect that we can meet the 40% target very easily at the end of next year. So we cannot do everything in 5 years, but I think we made a great step forward to our target.
Wonderful. Thank you, Yun-sun. Just before I go further, you can already see we've got an argument, we've got a model unfolding here, and the discussion is going to lead us along a wonderful path here this afternoon, because there is prioritising women because of the female president. I'll come to you in a moment, Linda, about your idea of the priorities for your government and Europe. But one moment before I do this, we just have to get the social media going here, everybody, because we're very modern and technological. And so we have Wissembly. I don't know any of you, if you've got the app in your phones now, we are trying to be interactive on this panel because we want to get really good feedback here this afternoon. So Wissembly or Twitter we are using here this afternoon, everybody, if you want to get involved. Wissembly, Wissembly. And I'm going to ask you a question, and we want you to engage in a survey. We're using there it is, Wissembly. We're using this, and the hashtag for Twitter. Did we have that up there already? Oh, here we are. Okay, if you've downloaded Assembly, here's the first question. We're just talking about gender gaps, and we're talking about Korea getting up to maybe 30%, but aiming for 40%. In Australia, we're at 39 to 40% on government boards already, which is a very good level, and that's an ambition, not a quota, a target, though, nonetheless. So answer those questions for us, and we'll put up the answers momentarily. And also, if you want to tweet, hashtag OECD-RED. There it is, just OECD-RED. Put a hashtag in front of it if you want to get involved on Twitter. So there's our social media sorted. Linda, over to you. You were talking earlier about prioritising women in the discussion and the debate in Europe. Yun-sun has discussed the fact that with the female president, all of a sudden the language changed. You want to see the language change in Europe?
Yes, but I think that in Europe should change the language, first of all, Europe.
So the European Parliament, you want to see that...
The European Parliament, the European Commission. Because if we say, and we know that it's true, that gender balance is a policy for growth, not only for equality, but for growth, economic growth, and for tackling declining population, we have to put at the top of the agenda the policies for achieving gender equality. So, as we have in Europe very strong mandatory objectives, think about budgetary objectives and fiscal policies, as well as now migration or other rules that we have to respect to be into the parameters of Europe. So we have to adopt also the key policies of what I say the women agenda.
And you say it was down the
Yes, because
list, too
at the
far down the
end
list.
of the list there is something for women because it's good, because it's a social responsibility brand, but it's not so. We have to assume as a priority in terms of civil rights, of course, and it's not a secondary matter, but first of all, because we need in terms of political, of social and economical future. And that's why I say gender policies are in favor of future generations, because we cannot have a continent with a welfare future if we don't make now something for closing the gap. And I think that we have to write in Europe and to put in act in every single country a pink agenda, and to have also a pink brand. But I would say that a pink brand would be written in each product, and if there is a women coalition to buy only product with the pink
As
brand,
for business, women's
yes,
businesses
business should
branded.
have a convenience to have a policy pro gender equality. So there are very many instruments, but the crucial point is that policymakers assume this as a priority, and to have more women at the top of the government, of the parliament, of the institution, of course, make it easier.
Do you think women have an appetite to get into government? Are you seeing more women want to get into politics or less?
No, absolutely. It's not easy because the selection is not a meritocracy selection, and political parties are not women managed. So in politics, what the methodology is not is a cooptation system for appointments. So women have a lot of difficulties, as have less money than men in the electoral campaign. Also because they are more honest, so they exchange less money with policies, and the same, that they are more sincere. So a compliment made by a woman is something to be proud about. So
to use
the example
exactly.
that
when the president's paying
yes,
her ministers a compliment, they're very.
It's really true. If say any man say always the how good, but it's not so true. And so I think there are many things to do, but the political people who are at the top of the government and the parliament, of the decisions making, have to assume as and international organizations, of course, OECD, United Nations, but also the institutions, international institutions, which decide about
to elevate women
destiny,
in
have to decide. That's why I say European Union, because European Union is a very strong institution with the country which are part of it. So
it's also in the G20
yes.
as well, which is very important.
Yes.
Farah, you're about to say something. You have some comment on this being elevated in policy sense.
Yeah, I have a few comments. So on the point, I had the pleasure of working with the Deputy Prime Minister of Canada, who was a woman, and came up against a number of different barriers. But I think we're having a generational shift. I think that when it comes to politics, more women are willing to take the risk. They understand there are certain things that they need to do. But that's actually not what I wanted to talk about. What I wanted to talk about was, if we look at the question, how are we going to close this gap? I think from my experience, I think there are a number of things that we need to do. First of all, I think it's incredibly important across this G20 membership that they identify the barriers and they remove those barriers through legislation. So we were talking earlier, ownership. If you cannot own land, how are you supposed to reap a profit from that? If you can't own land, you can't get capital. I'm going to push that a little further. If you don't have mobility, how are you going to get to work? Inheritance laws. So I think that what we need to do is across the board identify what are the barriers and then legislate to remove them because they're not going to go voluntarily. The second thing I would say that we need to do, and this is something that I'm very proud of our girls across the Girls 20 community, is to identify the best practices. What's actually working? How do you take those best practices and then customize them for another country? So we know when the women have access to technology, in some cases, let's take example, agriculture, farming. If a female farmer has access to mobile technology, she'll know when to plant, when to harvest, how much to sell, and who to sell to. Now you've taken her from being a farmer to being a small, what's the right term here? The smallholder who will employ people. That's going to drive female labor force up. That's important.
And then incentives for employing people as well are another add-on.
Then finally, I'll say this last thing. We have to look at, and I hope that you'll, we talked about this a little bit over lunch, and this has been my big thing, removing an unconscious bias. We're sitting in a country, and I hope I don't come across the border one day and says you're not allowed in now because I'm about to say this, but why does anybody in France have to put their picture on a CV? So here I understand you put your name, you put your picture, and you put your age. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say if you didn't put your name on a CV and you didn't put your picture on a CV, no one would know if it was a man or woman, and so you're going to hire the best person. So I think that we have to get rid of some of these constructs that hold people back. Whether or not you know you're doing it, it is in fact being done. I'll save some of the other stuff for later.
I know, we've got tons. We've got plenty of time too, right? Farah, which is great. Cultural, you've just mentioned this, the clash of cultures. There are so many differences. I'll come to you in a second, Esperanza. But Arantxa, I want to talk to you about cultural differences, certainly in international trade, where we have these ambitions, we talk about this stuff. We're all agreeing on it, but culturally there are challenges, I am certain, to closing this gap or to women's labour force participation. Farah's just outlined a couple of them, but you would see it at your level.
Well, let's say that in the area of trade, it's less about culture and it's more about barriers. And the barriers that I see are very concrete, not intangible, but more in the tangible world. And by the way, what's true for the G20, we are focusing a lot of the conversation here on the G20. What's true for the G20 is true for the rest of the world. The beginning of this conversation is that removing barriers to trade for the participation of women in trade equals productivity, competitiveness, and social benefits. Let's never forget that. We want women in the economy, not just because it's morally the right thing to do, not just because it's a right, but because it makes a lot of economic sense. Now, what is it that we can do to get there is, I guess, the question that you want us to address. In my experience, we need to do 4 things. It has to start with identifying these barriers. Let me tell you a few of the ones we have seen. You know that when companies export, they are more profitable and they are more competitive. In a recent survey we've done, only 1 in 5 exporting companies are women-owned companies. So women are not participating in trade in the same proportion as men, although half of the world SMEs are women-owned. 2, public procurement. $15 trillion a year market. Women, only 1%, estimated 1%, is probably below that, of this market. So it's about going and unpacking, identifying these measures and unpacking them. It's not enough to say we want more women in the economy. Okay, how? 2, if you identify them, then commit to remove them. commitment to remove them is not just a governmental issue. It's each and every one of us that can do that. We in the International Trade Center have committed to bring 1 million women businesses to markets by 2020. The part that we will do, very small, but lots of partners out there will do that with us. So if you want to do that, help us do that. #SheTrades. Commit to bring 1 million women to markets by 2020. But committing is not enough. It's acting. It's making the difference. And there are lots of people in this panel that have much more to say on that, so I'll not dwell on that. The fourth thing we need is measure. Measure, measure, measure. It's not enough to measure women in boards. It's not enough to measure women in parliaments. We have to measure how many women are not financially included. How many small and medium enterprises do we have? How much is the corporate world purchasing from women-owned businesses? We have to measure. I love Sheryl Sandberg saying, what you don't know, what you don't care, but once you know, you cannot but care.
And we talk about measuring too, and I must say, this is the key to it. It's all lots of talk, but the measuring now comes now to prove. Janet, you want to say something, representing small to medium enterprise. And if you say, Arantxa, 50% of the world's small businesses are run by women?
Sí, yo quisiera tomar el tema.
Yes, I would like to talk about barriers. Because although there are many points in common here, the barriers to access the labor force aren't necessarily the same ones that exist inside companies to enable women to move up in the hierarchy of a company. I would say that the main obstacle that women are facing today, and I even think that this is the case for men from the new generation, is the balance of work and private life. That's a great obstacle, and this is associated with flexibility. Today, this issue at the company level is something that we should really address because it needs to be addressed. And then there's something else. We have to see how we can perform an onboarding, how we can actually make the corporate sector be interested in these themes, because companies sometimes, well, they don't give priority to these issues. So gender issues for companies, not only gender issues, but just inclusion in a broader sense of other minorities, aren't on the agenda. So we need that to be on the agenda. And finally, another barrier I think is out there is the fact that it's hard for us women to have proper visibility inside an organization. Sometimes it's hard for us to raise our hand and say, hey, here I am, I exist. Sometimes we tend to think that we kind of have to do stuff that men don't have to do before we can actually opt to a high responsibility post. Well, no, that's not true. So we have to see how, with community support and with policy support, because this has to do with childcare as well and the care of the elderly. All of this has to work together so that we can get better results in this sense. Thank you.
Too much discussion of all this by government and not the private sector, do you think, Janet? Is that one part of it? I mean, you're representing the private sector. We can all talk government, world organisations, and so on, but they're not really representative of that small to medium or that business sector, right? Government talks about this stuff, but are they talking to business?
Yo creo que el sector privado.
Actually, I think that the private sector doesn't have the proper networks to discuss this. So the debates that we have in Latin America are favored by the networks we have with clients and NGOs. We also work with Comunidad Mujer, which is an NGO, and these are our platforms. Furthermore, there's no visibility for women, and we don't have data either. The private sector in Latin America doesn't know what the gaps in wages are. We don't know how well represented women are in companies. In our company, for instance, the representativity of women is over 50%. You would say this is extraordinary, but in Latin America, executive posts only represent 20% women. And I think that the objective is 41 in 2025. And we need benchmarks. If there's no visibility, there's no benchmarks. And if we don't have benchmarks, we can't improve.
About culturally, Latin America, you were saying earlier at lunch that maybe, and we just hear 20% of boards are women represent only on boards. There is a cultural issue, you think, here? I mean, that is a counter to some of the other conversations you've heard?
Sí, yo quisiera vincular la
Well, I would like to link the access of women to labor with education. We're often wondering what the barriers are, what the barriers to access the labor market are. And rather than be structural, they're actually cultural barriers that are set up from childhood. And I think that the difference in genders starts from a very early age. I think we should start saying that there is no difference between a boy and a girl, neither in their way of socializing or in their way of learning. And the barriers start from very early on. And we use sort of stereotypes. We're demanding from girls different things from what we're demanding of boys. And one day I was in a hospital. There was a little girl and a little boy with his mother, and the boy was allowed to go up and down on the staircase, and the girl wasn't allowed to do the same thing. So we do have these prejudices that are deeply ingrained, and that's where the inequality and the difference begins, because women start approaching some areas. People think that they're not as good for maths as boys, and in a way that it comes from the teachers, because the teachers have this idea, and they think that the girls therefore are no good at maths, and this obviously has an impact in their professional development. And there's a segmentation of the labor market. At least in our region, women work in very feminized jobs in education and trade, and not in traditionally much better paid jobs. There are only a very short percentage, small percentage of women study science, and that's why there's a difference in wages and obviously in all the data on women. I think that we have to start from very early on in childhood. It's very important because power ratios emerge at that time. And I think that there is a violent gender that comes from these power ratios, and we have to start acting from very early on for these stereotypes not to continue, not to be reproduced. And I also feel that different countries should include in their labor policies and in their policies in general a co-responsibility, because so long as women are still in charge of taking care of children, of the house, and men are the ones who are the breadwinners, the inequalities will not disappear, and we won't make any progress. Obviously, we're not going to have exactly the same responsibility in earning a living, but we shouldn't be the only ones in charge of the housework. I think in Latin America, at least in my country, we have a very patriarchal type of value and structure. And actually, women are not given the same chances as men in the private sector. And actually, in Chile, access of women to higher education was extremely important. But this is not, has no correlation with their participation in the labor market. And it's very paradoxical, because the birth rates in Chile are similar to the average OECD birth rates, but women in Chile are don't participate in the same proportion to the labor market. And it's very hard to do away with these stereotypes, and we still have to work very hard on changing these stereotypes.
In Australia, if I may use our example, we don't, in our census, measure the part-time work, the work done by women in that unmeasured economy. So are we measuring the right things? We're putting women into STEM, we're encouraging women into science, technology, engineering, mathematics. And maybe they're studying it, young girl, maybe they're not, but they are all going to the softer sector, the teaching, the services, the health, the care sector, hard to measure. So maybe labour workforce participation is higher than we know in a part-time sense, and in that sense that's unmeasured, because we don't have the question asked certainly in our census, and maybe in those of others as well. And just one other thing, and I'll come to you, Farah, in a sec. 2014 Australian Household Income and Labour Dynamics Survey found that women do more paid employment, housework, childcare combined than men, regardless of whether, 1, the man is the main earner, 2, the men and the women earn equal amounts, or 3, the woman earns more. The woman still does more in that housework, childcare area. Farah, you wanted to pick up on this.
I think one of the things that we have found, and perhaps it's because it's a very cute picture when you look at the G20 and you see the makeup of the G20, only 2 women are part of this very elite group. But dig a little deeper and think about the role of men. I had an opportunity to be in Ethiopia a few years ago, and we were looking at child marriage. What happens when a young girl gets married at the age of 15? How do you stop this? And very aggressively, very methodically, this group of people headed by Desmond Tutu went in and said, we need to engage men. They need to understand the narrative, the reasonings, what you gain when your daughter goes to school rather than when she gets married at 15. So I think we need to, there are policies, there are regulations, there are players, whether they be private sector, social profits, but I think you've got to take it down to the basics, and that is, what is the role in engaging men? We had launched a very simple viral campaign called Fathers Empowering Daughters. We got Richard Branson and Chelsea Clinton and Shakira and a bunch of others to tell their stories about how they empower one another. And what I found, which was really powerful, was men actually want to be engaged. I think the days are gone now when we have that men versus women, you empower a woman by disempowering a man. No one actually believes that. But I do think that we need to look at how do we engage men at the political level, at the family level, at the private sector level, where you need to have champions for men, and in agencies and organizations where, if you say procurement from women-owned, led businesses, so you say, listen, you want to make a difference, then go and make a change, make a conscious decision to buy from a woman, a 51% owned or operated business. As a consumer, when you go buy something, why don't you ask the question, is this made by a woman? And you might see what the purchasing power then becomes. I want to just say one last thing. Yes, I do agree that we need to measure what we would call unpaid work. Very, very unpopular term, but a term nonetheless. The problem with measuring that is we are not going to measure purchasing power. And purchasing power is important. So we can measure that, and I think it's
part-time either. That's the problem. We're not measuring the part-time either.
Right. So I don't think there's any
Unpaid
census.
and part-time.
Yeah, I don't think there's any census in the world that does that. But if you get that information, what do you intend to do with that information? How is it going to change the narrative in terms of getting the numbers back up? And I'm not convinced that that will make the difference. It's what do you do with that? How does that actually translate into a dollar figure? Because I'm going to just remind you that the G20 made this commitment because they all recognized that their GDP would not go up unless women were working.
Yeah.
And that was the genesis of this commitment.
And yes, Arantxa, do you have comments?
The figure is pretty clear. We have the figure. The figure is called 12 trillion US dollars, or 16% of 12 trillion US dollars. Just, let's say it's loud and clear so that we get it right. It's 16% of global income that represent the misallocation of a very, very powerful resource called women.
Is that what we're missing out on?
That's what we're missing out
You
by
can
modest
measure this.
by modest estimates. It's not me saying it. I mean, there's Ernst & Young, Goldman Sachs, IMF, World Bank. Now, again, back to what we do. Laws. The United States has a law that says 4% of all public procurement will be procured from women vendors. Kenya has a similar law. 30% will be from SMEs and women-owned suppliers. It makes a difference. The market is 15 trillion. It's lots of zeros, I know, but I mean, we have to start putting price tags to this. 2, corporate behavior. Corporations can decide that they buy from women suppliers. Actually, many corporations are doing that. Actually, they are encouraged to do that by a United Nations set of principles called Women Empowerment Principles. So you, Coca-Cola, Unilever, Sodexo, and the list goes on, can decide that you will purchase X% of your products or services from women-owned companies. You do good while you do business. So corporate behavior too.
Okay, I want to talk about government behaviour. Yun Sun was talking about... Oh, sorry. Janet first, picking up on this, yes.
Sorry.
Yeah.
En español.
That's okay.
I forgot.
I'll come to you in a second.
Solo
Well, with regards to what Arantxa was saying, I would like to share with you a study on over 50,000 managers and a number of subsidiaries on the non-economic impact, which within a company is very strong. And we had categories of groups, the best balanced and the less well-balanced. And in the best balance of genders, we looked at the engagement rate of the staff. And the engagement rate where there was a good balance was 3.1% above that in the other group. And in the subsidiaries that had a better balance, had a brand awareness that was 5% above that of the other category. And this is linked with the growth of the business. The growth of the business was 12% lower in the category of subsidiaries that didn't have such a good balance. So we're talking about raising awareness, which means educating. And obviously, this actually has a social impact. It's not something that we're just doing because we want to. It has to do with the level of engagement of our workers.
Just done by, they did it themselves, not government legislation, this is just them showing leadership.
Sí, esto solamente...
Now, this was something because the private sector is not in a formal system. We've only measured some of the companies that are listed, the 40 best listed companies. And I'm not even talking about the representativity of women in boards of directors. But out of the 11 executive women, none of them was a CEO. So once again, the measurement are quite insufficient for us to be able to do something.
Model here, which Yun Sun shared with us at lunchtime. We'll keep the conversation going, but there's a wonderful, we thought, model for measuring this in Korea, the cooperation between government and corporate, and then reviewing it every 2 months. Talk to us about the initiative in Korea, Yun Sun. I thought this was a really exemplary model.
Actually, in year 2014, our government formed a task force calling Empowering Women and Gender Parity TF. And the major purpose of this TF was to kind of change the mindset of the companies to receive they have to take those methodologies for the work-life balance and to share the right information. And the basic purpose of this TF is that voluntary planning and implementation by the corporations and the government providing the tailor-made supports to this corporation. So the basic reason why I thought about this task force is when I was a minister, I met so many CEOs who have the personal experience of successful work-life balance tools. And then they were so profitable to their companies. But I doubt why, if it is so good, why it is not spread out so quickly as much as I wanted. Perhaps it is too precious trade secret that they don't want to share with their competitors. So I'd like to kind of spread those kind of good best practices to the field. So we discussed and we formed a task force inviting more than 117 companies and public institutions and municipal government. And on the day, in an economic forum, we executed an MOU with the CEOs or responsible officers from each company. And one press mentioned that almost more than 40% of Korea GDP was there, and they promised to empower the female workforces. And the basic structure is to provide a platform for those who want to learn, who want to share and teach and be the mentor. And every 2 months we have we open a forum, and then in the forum we share which company, certain companies set up their own target, and then discuss how to achieve that and monitor whether they actually achieve that or not, and share the best practices. So let me introduce several very interesting best practices. The one company kind of target is to put 10% of more women in the promotion pool than men. So that is quite a very interesting
promotion
target.
pool. This is a channel. This is a pathway for executive.
Yes, right.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So, for example, if they promote 100 person this time, they put like 45 men and 55 women, something like that. And the other company is adopting automatic maternity and parental leave. In order to avoid any discrimination and in order to encourage the female employees who hesitate to take the maternity leave because of the potential discrimination. And one interesting thing is that a company declared that they will give an average points to the employees who take the maternity leave. That means before that, they traditionally gave the lowest points to the ones in their maternity leave. So we found that there have been a lot of obstacles, very discreetly but unconsciously built in the corporate system, in the personnel management. So our proposal, it was so rewarding for us to find such a very minute ones, but which actually acted as major obstacles in kind of encouraging female employees to keep their life-work balance. So by doing that for over 2 years, we checked, we measured what is the performance, and then we found that the ratio of female employees among those who got promotion was raised from 15% to 30%. And the more men employees, they go to the parental leave. And as a poll says, the result says, more than 85% employees answered that first, they came to understand the government policy better, and they came to utilize the benefits provided by the government better. And the second, they found that their mindset and culture in their companies are being changed. And the third, their management and their bosses, they found that their bosses' attitude are changing. So it's very rewarding. And
Wonderful.
then we are expanding the members, and now it is 137, and then it's ongoing.
Amazing. Are you over 50% of Korea GDP yet? It was 40%, you said, they made up. Is it rising? You don't have measured that yet?
Let me check when I come back.
Sorry,
I didn't.
yeah. Trick question, sorry. No. Esperanza, please, you were wanting to react to that as well. Yeah.
Sí, yo la verdad es que quería
Actually, yes, I wanted to talk about regulations and frameworks. I think that our legislation should stimulate female participation in the labor market, since they're all intelligent. And I think that there has to be a good supply for childcare so that men and women can go and work, and that they can work at working hours that are compatible with the usual working hours in a company. I think this is very important, that there is childcare to be able to combine professional and family life. There has to be a percentage of time that is also devoted to men so they can go on leave after the birth of their child. And there are very few men who do it. And I believe that the issue of childcare is a major issue, and it's a theme that is going to be all the more important in an aging society, is the care, even for an elderly person, because women are the ones who are bearing the brunt of this care. In our region, about 80% of women are the ones who are caring for the elderly. And this is a major barrier. We're always talking about childcare, and we don't mention the care given to elderly people. And this is also something that we have to have in mind, because it's invisible. And I think that there has to be a co-responsibility, not only between fathers and mothers who work, but also in the society. There has to be a whole structure to help women and to help in the care field generally. And this is going to encourage women to be able to take part.
We were talking about the aging society, the care.
Yes.
But please.
From the discussion emerged a lot of problems which have to be focused by political institutions and to be tackled with different policies. The first is, as was said before, changing mind, changing public opinion. So I think the first point is to organize the strong campaign for make public opinion aware that such a low rate of employment for women is not compatible with growth and with the well-being of people in the future. Government, which is a political institution, so had to be supported by the public opinion, can put not perhaps at the top, but at the middle of the agenda,
yes.
At least.
Raise them a little.
Yes, rise step by step to climb the agenda. There are many things to do. Also for companies, you have to create an environment which make easier to employ women, which means infrastructure for care services for children and for elderly people, because our generation had children at the beginning and now has parents to assist. To incentivize company with fiscal incentives for increase women in their companies, and also with that pink brand, which if you make aware public opinion that to have women in your company is a good thing for the company and for the society as well, Pink Bread can get an incentive for selling more goods, more services. And then the education, because the disparity begin in the first age of our life. So stereotypes, but also we are now experiencing in Italy special support for young girls who want to access STEM faculties in university, because you have to create a base where companies can pick the skilled women in the new sectors, which are technological and scientific sectors. So, first step, create a cultural environment, and we have to organize and ask for a very large campaign, and then a lot of policies which are clear, which are to be what we have to do. But we have to do this, and international organizations like World Bank, IMF, and OECD have to push countries in this direction with very strong stimulus, because otherwise nothing will happen.
It's true, and I like that tweet right there, AM Slammery Slaughter, I think, that is, care for children and elderly is done by women. This must be addressed. It's the one thing that doesn't get measured over and over again, and we all say that it does not get measured. Are there any questions from the... Yes, there is. I just want to say, we'll get you to ask it, but we have one more question as well. You know how I gave you that one on assembly earlier? The second question is, can the G20 achieve this gender target? I'm not sure, they might put it up here, but do we think that the G20, I know this is rather controversial, we're challenging whether we believe that the G20 can achieve that gender gap in labour force participation by 25% by 2025. Give it a chance if you want to answer it and see if you agree with it. We'll get that. I'm not sure what... I have a let's take this question. Yes.
Hi. My name is Joanna. I'm actually from Poland. And I just want to share one thing, and then I'm going to go to the second, is that we have a prime minister. She's a lady. And unfortunately, since the new government, we have the worst situation for women with abortion, with gender. So it's actually, unfortunately, sometimes putting a woman on top doesn't help. But what I want to say is, you talk about the labor market, and I don't know about you, do you know about the online market? I just witnessed something just recently, and I want to share with you. It's about a project which was in Kosovo, and I went to Kosovo. It's called Women Online Work. It's funded by World Bank. It's by Codes Trust, which actually want to introduce them more to Europe too. And actually, I was witnessing 100 ladies, women who were in 20s, who were unemployed, and they were having to the everyday education about coding and online. After 3 months, they already got working on web development, designing, and from zero employment, zero money, they already make like $600 per month, which in Kosovo is huge.
And they're making on their own businesses, yes?
Yes, and what's great is about talking about labor. For example, you work in a factory. Today, this factory is in Kosovo, is in India. Tomorrow, they leave, and you're left for work. Whereas if you are online and you learn to be freelancers, it's you and the internet and the opportunities there. So just to have you this also having idea that online and work service like that, like Upwork, gives a huge opportunity, and I think this could be a wonderful solution for women.
Services, maybe the service sector, accounting, bookkeeping, things like that, online, technology, yeah?
Yeah, technology.
Thank you. Yes, over to you, Arantxa. And I'll look for any other questions. Yeah, go on, Arantxa, you talk.
100% in agreement with you. Services and the delivery of services online is a huge opportunity, not just in Kosovo, in a place called Dadaab, where there are 800,000 Somali refugees sitting in Kenya, is where ITC is doing exactly what you're describing with an NGO called Norwegian Refugee Council, connecting refugees to markets as an answer to the humanitarian difficulties we are facing today. and doing what we here talk so much, which is bridge the humanitarian with the development gap. So great example. Thanks a lot for that.
Wonderful, thank you. Yes, we've got about 10 or 15 more minutes. I might go over yet. We'll just see. Janet, did you want to say something? No?
No, it's just I would like to add something related with your point about the incentives, and I do believe there is no one solution. So from the company perspective, I do believe more important than to have incentives coming from the public policies, such as, for example, tax reduction or any other. More important than that is really the first things to do is to have the commitment from the top management. And secondly, to really allocate the resources you need to put in place the different initiatives to comply with the targets. So it's not at the end of the day, you need a lot of things coming together to get the good result. There is no magic recipe.
No, exactly. I must say, Arancha, I'll pick up on a barrier. I've got a question here, but one of the barriers to trade in the G20 space is, I read, or I was heard yesterday, that 3,300 agreements are between G20 countries only. I mean, if that's not a barrier, then I don't know. I'm a man or something, maybe. 3,300 agreements between the countries of the G20. I mean, trade agreement, that's compliance, that mountain of administration, cost, time wasting. It's ridiculous. So these are barriers to trade, surely. I couldn't believe the number. A question? Yes?
Hello, my name is Max from New Zealand. I've got a question regarding discrimination. The question's revolving around benevolent sexism and how we can combat that. Vicious sexism is quite easy to identify, but benevolent sexism is a little bit harder. Thank you.
Any comments, or we take that as a comment? You want to? Oh, do I? You don't know? We'll take it as a comment. Yes, another one. You, sir.
Hello, my name is Youngchun Song. I'm from South Korea. Currently, I'm doing internship in the delegation of Korea to the OECD. I just want to ask you, because at first when I saw the list of speakers, I was really surprised that there's no single man on the speakers because, yeah.
That's good, but we have quite a lot in the audience. Put all the men in the audience. We've got 50% representation of men in the audience here today. Oh, 30%, girls, would it be? Well, we're glad you're in on the conversation, gentlemen. Thank you. Okay.
Yes, there are certain concerns among some men, actually, like many men, that the approaches to close the gap, gender gap, causes reverse discrimination against men. First of all, like I'm proud to be a male feminist in the male-dominant society of South Korea. But anyway, so there is a certain concerns that it causes reverse discrimination.
Sure.
I'm not sure whether all of you recognize how horrible incident happened in Seoul, South Korea last week. There was one woman who was just killed in the public bathroom just because she was a woman. So she was killed by a man, and he said that he just hates the woman. And she was the first woman who entered the public bathroom, and she became the victim. So I was just wondering how all of you think about those kind of concerns that efforts to close the gender gap will cause some men think about it will be reverse discrimination against me or against all men.
Thank you for your question. We have a comment. Linda, yes, thank you very much.
I would comment because it's a very important...
so you talk about meritocracy, yeah?
Yes, but not only. There is a concern, of course, meritocracy, it's not in favor of men, because every time that there is a selection on meritocracy basis, public selections, exams, university, women are better. But what we have to say and remember is that has been calculated that for every woman in job, 15 more jobs are created. So more jobs for women doesn't mean that jobs for men will be reduced. This is a key point, because there is this concern that if more women work, there should be more unemployment for men. It's not true. All grow up if more women work. So also on this point, I think we have to make aware public opinion.
Thank you.
Work is not a finite quantity.
No.
It's something which can grow
We can grow the
if we
market.
do the right things.
Here. Yes, so yes.
Sí, yo la verdad que
Yes, I wanted to say that often, if we treat men and women equally, that doesn't necessarily mean that there will not be any discrimination. What you were saying is a general concern. Well, not a general, but a lot of people are concerned about this. And this has to do with gender quotas. Some people say that there should be no gender quotas because women should go higher in the ranks because of merit. But equality is not something that is guaranteed. The playing field is not level. Women do not have the same opportunities to participate in the labor force. They have to face all these barriers that we have been discussing. And well, I feel that democratic states should try to guarantee or try to revert the lack of equality to give women the same opportunities at the end of the day that actually men have. Because today, women are facing more barriers. It's as simple as that. And we have not eliminated enough barriers that women face to have a level playing field. They have less access to production chains, to value chains. They have less access to trade as well. It happens in all fields and sectors. They face a whole series of obstacles and barriers that men do not face. So it is an obligation to try to level the playing field, to try to correct in a certain way the unfair and biased situation so that they can participate fully in the labor force, in the political sphere, in the business sphere, and in general.
Hi.
Stand up. I've got you.
My name is Yolanda. I'm with the Australian Women's Chamber of Commerce and Industry. I'm sorry to hear the other person talking about the female president in Poland, but that starts my question. Does the panel believe that if we do actually have more women in leadership positions within politics, and I'm not just saying within the Senate or the upper or lower house, but in actual leadership positions, would we see significant change? And if you say yes, how do we then get there? So that's my question. I just also want to thank you all for all the wonderful work that you are doing. Y las de habla hispana, mil gracias por vuestro trabajo. Realmente lo necesitamos. Gracias.
Your work is great, and we really need it. Thank you very much.
Well, anybody?
Yo,
Janet.
Voy a...
Yes, I want to reaffirm. I go back and forth between English and Spanish. I'm sorry. I'm going to reaffirm the fact that I totally agree with what has just been said. We always talk about female representation, particularly in the public sector. We talk about quotas. We talk about figures, numbers that we see in reports. But I really think that the main driver here to have a good, positive economic and social impact, what has to happen is that the public sector has to go hand in hand with the private sector. And it seems like something easy to say, but actually managing to have good public-private partnerships, having good public policies in this sense, and at the same time having a private sector that understands that the inclusion of minorities is good for business and also good for social and other reasons, having all of that which strengthens society and also having the appropriate educational tools to strengthen all of that. Well, that's a sort of utopia. I hope I will see it one day, but it's not the present-day situation. We don't have to focus on one sector or the other. We have to think in a broad sense here.
Model, which I thought was exemplary, which you Sun discussed earlier about the cooperation between the private and the public sector. We've got a couple more minutes. I'm just going onward. Yes, you, sir. Have you got a microphone?
Hi, Thibaut Thomas from France. I have a question regarding employment of women. One of the most problematic ways to look at employment of women, discrimination, is about the maternity leave. And I was wondering what you thought about policies of having mandatory paternity leaves, which would actually kind of equalize, for a great cost, unfortunately, but will like equalize the job market. Thanks so much.
Okay, maybe that maternity leave in Korea included men as well, did it not, Yoon Sun? It was...
No, that single case about automatic maternity leave, the parental leave is
parental leave.
That was a maternity leave, but in terms of the parental leave, I think it is completely up to the choice of the men employees.
Farah?
I think parental leave is a game changer. I really do. Lucky again to live in Canada where you get a year off. We now call it parental leave. We don't call it maternal leave, and I think language matters. I also think that if you start to mandate things like that, you're going to start leaving out a lot of other kinds of families. Not every family has a male and a female. Not every, right? So I think that we have to be very careful about how far we mandate, and maybe. You know, maybe I sound a little bit naive when I say this, but I have to believe that when people become parents, they want to share in the upbringing of their child. And there are certain situations that allow that, and there are certain situations where you have to correct the imbalance. And I think that's where companies can come in, where government can come in. But I think when you start to mandate something like you must, that doesn't necessarily make for good parents or good parenting. And I don't know that it actually will change or impact having more women go into the labor force. While I've got the mic, I was not going to do this.
I've got a time limit here, but yes, go on.
Well, I would say, sorry.
Yeah, keep going.
No.
Finish your
Finish.
point.
No.
Oh, she's given it away. Okay.
No, I would say that our legislation in Italy is very advanced in the sector, and the father has a few mandatory days after the birth of the baby, and then after the first 3 months, they can choose for when the baby is ill or there are other problems. But I agree on the point that parity is not identity, and mother is not the same that the father. We are different, and we have to remain different also in the relationship with a little baby. So I think that we have to not to be extremist and as to be very coherent with the reality. This is my opinion. Perhaps I am too old, but
Linda, never. You're young. Yoon Sun, you wanted one closing remark. I will close it up.
Actually, regarding the kind of men employees kind of parental leave, I think that actually worked because the responsibility of raising kids are majorly imposed on the shoulder of the female, the kind of women in Korea. However, as we have more men kind of taking the vacation to raise their kids, that means they have built their expertise in raising kids when the kids are so young. Because as soon as a baby is born, the new mother and new father is very new to raising kids. But as the mom takes 3 months maternity leave, they get expertise. So after that, the mom gets more expertise while father knows nothing to do with the babies. And as time goes by, that is fixed like a culture. So I think we see the many evidences that the men taking the parental leave, they have more knowledge and they get expertise and they feel more comfortable with the babies, and then gradually, naturally, the responsibility of caring child is kind of shifting or sharing between the man and wife. Actually,
Yun Sun, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off, I'm afraid, because if we were on television, they'd pull the plug and turn us off. So, everybody, I want us to thank one by one Janet Awad from the Regional Chair of Latin America Country President Sodexo, Chile. Farah Mohammed, the founder and CEO of Girls 20, the other G. Arantxa Gonzalez, the Executive Director of International Trade Center. Arantxa, thank you. Linda Lanzillotta, who is the Vice President of the Italian Senate, Ambassador for Women in Parliament. Thank you, Linda. Yun Sun Cho, former Minister of Gender Equality and Family in Korea, Senior Secretary for Political Affairs, Office of the President. Thank you so much. And last but not, Esperanza Coeto, President of Comunidad Mujer Chile. Everybody, thank you so much. Let's close that gap by 2025. Thank you.
Sorry, before you leave, I know that you've been very active on Assembly, so it would be great, if you don't mind, if we have one question about this specific session. If you could just answer that, that would be really helpful. Thanks so much. The results, yeah, actually. Could we show the results of the polls from Assembly quickly? So those are the results.